Hi, it's Tracy. Hello. And if we've not met before, welcome to my home here in Sussex, England. This episode is all about hydrangeas. I adore hydrangeas, both inside and outside. I love to style with them, but they can be very expensive to go out and buy. So in this episode, I'm going to show you how I grow my own free home decor. Now, this is not a gardening channel, so I'm not going to be using lots of long Latin names and going into technical details, but I am going to show you how I take cuttings, how I do my pruning. I'll show you 5 different ways to dry the flowers, what I feed them with. We'll look at pH levels, colour changing, and of course, because this is a home decorating channel, there'll be lots of styling. There are 5 different types of hydrangeas, 5 different groups, and 2 of them I grow here, so it keeps life really quite simple. The majority of mine are from the macrophylla group, so I've got mop heads, lace caps, and a few serrata varieties. But my big styling is done with my Annabelle. I'll show you more on that later. I grow everything in pots, and when they get to about 3 years old, then I like to put some into the ground. But I do like to keep a lot in pots because it's so versatile. The pots can be moved around the garden, they can be taken onto the verandas, they can be brought into the house. There's lots of different ways that you can use them. So out here in this area, there are different stages of growth. So these vary from 1 year upwards. In the black tubs here, these are cuttings that I took 2 years ago. So they're just 2 years old. This is what they looked like after their first year of growth. Now I feed all of mine Miracle Grow plant food. Sometimes I'll put down some bloodfish and bone, but only on the big established plants. This is a 2-year-old plant. I mean, can you imagine how much I'd be paying at a garden centre for that? Probably 25 to 35 pounds for that size. Well, we don't want to be doing that, do we? So let me show you how I take my cuttings. First of all, the plant has got to be very well hydrated. Don't attempt to take cuttings from a plant with drooping leaves. Then I'm looking for a stem that has not got a flower bud on it, and I'm going maybe 2 or 3 sets of leaves down and then cutting there. I'm using just a general purpose compost that I've pre-watered, and then I'm going to start reducing the leaves. So I'm just nipping off just where that leaf node is. The idea is that we want all the energy now to go into root production. With a pair of scissors, I'm actually going to reduce the top leaves as well. So it looks quite brutal, but remember, the whole idea is just to keep putting all that energy into producing the roots. Now, once I've done all of that, I'm going to take a rooting hormone, rooting powder, and just dip the ends in. It's not absolutely necessary, but I've got it, so I might as well use it. I do find it tends to work better, as does, I am told, and I've not done this before, putting the little cutting right next to the edge of your container, and that's supposed to encourage even more root growth. So I'm going to experiment with that and do some of them by the edge and then do some further in. I always keep a bucket of water to hand because when I'm doing a few at a time, obviously I want to keep them hydrated. So there we go, 30. I've got 6 in each. I've even taken some Annabelle. So we'll see how we get on with those. Within 2 to 3 weeks, the roots should appear. I tend to leave them about 6 weeks in the kitchen courtyard area where it's light but not a lot of direct sunlight. Let me take you back in time to the cuttings that I did exactly this time last year, and then I can take you on through the process. So we've time travelled back to the 10th of September last year, to be precise, and all of the cuttings have rooted. So time to move them onto their individual pots. Look at that for a bunch of sexy roots. It's worked so well. Now I'm going to move them on, as I say, into individual pots, again just using a decent quality compost. And when I've potted them up, I'm going to move them back into the kitchen courtyard, and they're going to live exactly in this position all winter long. We don't get particularly cold here, so there's no need to put any plastic over them or protect them in any way. they will survive the winter. If we are going to get a really cold spell, then I would look to protect them. Now, let's jump forward to today. And all bar one survived the winter, two of which I'm already styling with on the house veranda. If you saw that intro, look at those little pink pops down in the corner there. And the Annabelles, first time I've actually taken the Annabelle cuttings. Look at those, that's 1 year's growth. Fabulous. Now I wish I could say the same for the mother plant. Bertie and I were out one morning after a particularly heavy thunderstorm and look what had happened. Oh, my heart went to my boots. This is the problem with Annabelle. The stems are so weak. It is such a diva of a plant. It really needs supporting, and the slugs and snails have gone berserk this year. After carefully shaking off all the water from the heads, I've staked it up. It's not pretty. I'm thinking next year I'm going to invest in a cage, some really good quality support. In the meantime, this will do, because this is all about preserving the home decor. We're going to be wanting to take cuttings from this. We're going to want to use the fresh flowers. The ones that had been destroyed, I popped into some water. But let's spin back in time to the end of last summer and I'll show you 5 different ways to dry them. Now, when the flowers are white, that is not the time to be picking in order to dry them. But when they start turning green and they get this lovely papery texture to them, that's the time to cut them in order to dry them. And just look at the size of some of these heads. Now, this is a little one here that is not ready, but it's just starting to show signs of deterioration. So I'm going to keep a very close eye on this over the next few days and weeks and catch as many as I can before they go over like these. Before I cut hydrangeas for drying, I always make sure they're fully hydrated and not wet, so not after a shower and not after morning dew. Probably about 11 o'clock would be a good time after the dew has passed. So where do I cut? Well, quite frankly, it just depends on what you want to do with them, how tall your vases are. This one, I'm counting a couple of leaves down and I cut straight on the plant. So that way there is as little damage and stress to the mother plant, if you like, to the main plant as possible. When I then go on to prepping them for drying, I then cut again the stem at a 45-degree angle to help with the drying out process. I also cut in batches, so I think this is probably enough for this first batch. I'm stripping off all the leaves. I like to go right up into the heads as well and take the leaves off there. Some people like to leave the top few. And then I'm going to cut the 45-degree angle on the stem. Prep done, and now I promised you 5 different ways to dry them. Here is number 1, and number 1 is the simplest. It is literally choose a vase and pop them in. These now want to go somewhere out of direct sunlight, away from drafts, and ideally somewhere quite cool. The drying time is generally a few weeks, but that will depend upon your own personal circumstances, humidity levels, and so on. Now on to method number 2. This time we're adding some water, probably about 1 inch to 2 inches, and then again just pop them in. I don't like to cram them in, particularly with Annabelles. I find Annabelles dry better if they've got some space around them that the air can circulate around the whole head. Now on to method number 3, the addition of glycerin. Sometimes it works brilliantly and sometimes it's an absolute disaster. So the ratio generally is 1 part glycerin to 2 parts water. If you've not used the glycerin before, it actually makes the petals very supple. So when you're normally drying hydrangeas, they become very papery, very brittle. The glycerin makes them super supple and the petals tend to shed less as well. So I would love to know, and I'm sure the rest of the community would love to know, have you got any tips on using glycerin? Now it's time for method number 4. And before we hang those up, let me tell you about method number 5. And it is simply leave it on the bush. Particularly with Annabelles, they dry back generally really quite well on the plant. They add such interest through winter and they're ideal to snip off and spray paint. And yes, I am popping some in the garage. Well, I do spend most of my time there. These are drying in the cloakroom, the downstairs toilet, the loo, which is quite a shock to visitors. I've been snipping these heads. These are mop heads and they're beautiful. The colour on them, it's just dried back. You know, when they say when you cut them, that colour stays. It slightly fades, but I am definitely eager to style with these. And I'm going to put them in an old box that the auction house was throwing away. It had a rotten bottom, so I turned it upside down, took its bottom off, staple gunned some chicken wire over it and trimmed it off with some twine. And now I think it's going to be the perfect container for these hydrangea heads. And whilst we're styling with the dried mop heads, another way, if you don't happen to have a wooden box with chicken wire over the top, just get a lovely big decorative bowl, fill it up with all those glorious dried heads, and then to add a little personal touch, maybe drop in a few of your favourite essential oils. Now, you may want to alter the colour slightly. So let's jump back into our time machine and go back to last autumn. Now the natural dried colour is lovely, but I'd also like to enhance that. So I've pulled out spray cans from the garage, all of which will suit an autumnal theme. This is a great way of colouring up grasses and dried flowers, anything you just want to highlight. So I find with this less is more, so I'm not going to give complete coverage to the head and I'm going to build up in little bursts and then just keep on adding quick squirts of other colours just to add that interest and that depth and variety. You can also use this technique on your existing florals, things that you just want to again revitalise, maybe change a colour scheme, you don't want to go out and buy new. So this is a great way of making everything come together to coordinate. Now these sprayed heads will just live as a flower arrangement for the time being, but when I'm ready to do my new door wreath, then they will be used in that. Ah, wreath making. I love a bit of wreath making. I've got this big ring, and when it's all dressed, it's nearly 3 feet across in diameter. Now, I love to use hydrangeas in my wreaths because they cover such a big area. And when you're doing a big wreath, obviously, if you can use something like the hydrangea in there that covers a big surface area, it actually cuts down on the expense of all the other materials that you need. And the beauty is you can spray them up to suit whichever season. Drying the flowers that you've grown means that you can use them all year round, and not just on their own. You can mix them in with faux, as I'm doing here for an autumnal display out on the house veranda. And of course, the dried heads are wonderful to use in Christmas decoration. I smattered these through my Christmas styling last year and absolutely loved them. Even brought out the spray can, put some gold on some of them, just to coordinate it with the decorating. Now, while I just show you a few images from Christmas, shall we talk about pruning? Do you always forget which ones flower on old growth and which on new? How many times have you been as pleased as punch with yourself, thinking that you've done the right thing, only to find you don't get a single bloom in the summer? So the way I remember it is there are 2 different types of pruning. One, you take the plant right the way down basically to the ground. The other one, you barely touch it all, you just take off the dead heads. So my Annabelle, which is a smooth hydrangea, other ones like paniculata, limelight, that type of thing, you can cut right the way down because they grow on new growth. I normally take mine down to about 30 centimetres. And I do it in February. Now this coming February, I'm going to take it right the way down to about 10 centimetres off the ground, about 2 buds up, and then put that framework over, and then I'll get the huge blooms. All my other ones, I leave the spent heads on and then just nip them off about March, April time, and that's it. Now, we've talked a lot about dried hydrangeas, obviously because you can use them so many months of the year. But when they're all in flower, it's wonderful to bring them indoors. This one in particular is already in a basket, so I don't need to do anything pretty to it, apart from it is going to have a leaky bottom and it is going to be watered. So I am going to put a plate underneath it just to scoop up that water. This one lived quite happily through my summer decorating here on the kitchen table until the end of the season, and then I just took it back outside. It was happy over winter. And now it's grown quite considerably, and I used it in the porch decorating for the cottage. So don't be afraid to bring your pots inside. You can put them into different containers, you can do lots of different things with them to make them look more appealing. This one is actually still out here and it's loving it. Let's jump back to autumn. My goodness, we are whizzing around the different seasons, aren't we? If you've got one in just an ordinary plastic pot, you could transform it by using some sacking, or you could use some sacking and then put it into a deconstructed chair. Before I give the last word to my big flouncy diva Annabelles, I just wanted to touch on pH levels. So did you know you can change the colour of your pink hydrangeas to blue and vice versa, depending upon the acidity or the alkalinity of your soil. So blue hydrangeas grow in acidic soil and pink are in alkaline. So if you want to control the colour of your blooms, then do a soil pH test and adjust accordingly. Now, if you're going to go out and spend some hard-earned money on buying hydrangeas, then I really wouldn't recommend Annabelle. I know it kills me to say it, but they really are such divas and their stems are so floppy. There is actually a newer version of Annabelle hydrangea and it's called Incredible. And it has much more rigid stems, so it doesn't have all the big floppiness going on, but it still has these lovely big voluptuous heads. Another one is Limelights. They're far less fussy than Annabelle's and they support themselves. They also seem to be much happier in almost any kind of soil and conditions, and they can grow in full sunshine as well with no problems. So choose wisely, folks, if you're going to spend money. Better still, just take cuttings from your friends, from your neighbours, maybe even a little bit of civic pruning.